I love this scenario right here, because this is one of those, what we're going to talk about today is, honestly, it's all the stuff that no one ever sees. It's all the stuff that a lot of people, including leadership in a lot of churches, don't even know that happens or think is important. But the reality is the whole sound man, worship leader, sound system, technical stuff is what holds everything together. These two guys right here are two of the most important people to me, even relationally, but in our world here at Bethel and with Bethel Music. They hold everything together. They're always pushing us for excellence. They're the reason why we've got a Midas console in the back, and we've got all automated monitors, and we've got new subs last night, you know what I'm saying? And so that the sound can be really good and impactful, and you can go to the next level. And so what we're gonna do is we're just gonna open it up, and we're just gonna start talking about worship leader, soundman relationships. And I always say this, like when we teach on this, I always say this right out of the gate, like, and it's real important. I honestly believe that probably next to the leader, the soundman is the most important person on the team. I really do, because I've been at places where I hear a band. I'm trying to give a scenario real quick. I have a band that I really like, and they're amazing. And I've basically bowed down to them, as a kid, like, these guys are amazing. Well, I did a conference with them one time, and it was at a hotel, and it was through a Mackie sound system. And they had a volunteer doing sound. I'm not gonna say names, because that'd be terrible, right? Dishonoring. So I went to the sound check, and I was sitting there in the set, and I'm like, this is the band that I've thought was amazing all these years, but now they sound like normal. They don't sound very good. And it was 100% because of the sound. And so the next night, what happened the next day is I went out and we bought a whole new system to this whole thing. And then the next night, apparently, magically, the Holy Spirit showed up. Magically. And it was amazing. And of course, no one would say this, but I'll say it, and I'll be bold enough to say that it was the sound. It was the sound. And so it's very important that we have those things in place. And these two guys are not just good at what they do, but they are the best. Martin Smith came along ship with us on tour and said that Chris Greeley over here is one of the top 3 soundmen in the worship movement ever. So, and Clint right here has had opportunity after opportunity to be a production manager for some of the largest bands in the secular world, and chooses to stay here and help our world. So I just want you to know, you're hearing from the best today. So you're welcome. I'm gonna ask you guys some questions. Do you guys want to jump in, or do you want me to just go ahead?
Hi.
I agree. We're the most important.
You should, because it's true. Just don't let it get to your head.
I think it's a huge privilege to be able to work here myself. This is the best environment I've ever been in an audio position for sure, because there is a lot of respect for our position here, and just everybody's so dang nice. I don't know, that's not always the case, and I mean I am just so grateful to be here. I had no idea what I was in for when I decided to move to Redding, California, a place I would never want to live before I moved here. That it would just be this awesome all the time. It's been really great.
All right, thank you, Chris. I'll receive that. Let's talk about this. I think let's talk about the lack of connection with worship leaders and the soundmen. Clint, go for it.
So probably the most common question I get from people is, it's like, my worship leader is like, they don't listen to me, and that's a really common problem. And I think that like the reason that that's the case is because you're not developing a relationship that's more than just surface level. And I think that's really common. It's like, man, you're just such a blessing. But like becoming real friends with your tech guys and building a really strong relationship so that you can trust them and be in a close relationship with them. And I think that solves like so much communication issue. It always does, really. But it just, I don't know, it makes it so much easier to deal with problems, feedback. When you love them and you appreciate them and you're like friends with them, it's like, hey man, it fed back, and you don't feel like offended that something bad happened, you know?
Yeah.
Because you know that they're not attacking you because you have a real relationship. That's really important. Well,
I think it's the best feeling in the world as a worship leader, and I think this is the goal for all of you if you're not in this position, but to know that your sound men, monitors, stage crew, and then the front of house mixers have your back as a worship leader. And there's not a worse feeling, I don't know about you, when you're leading and you know there's not a relationship there, and you know they don't have your best interest in mind, and vice versa. So when you're up there leading, they're not gonna, like they don't really care. They're not taking it serious, and they're just kind of like, whatever you give me, I'm just, you know what I'm saying? So these guys, that we've built a good relationship enough to where, like, I will ask them when I'm leading or doing sound check, like, are we good? Is there anything we could do to improve? And what they tell me, I respect, and I believe it, because I know that they've got my back, and I've got their back. So I think that's so important. And you would be surprised, and some of you experience this now, but I think the anxiety goes away and you become a better leader when that happens, because you can step out and you know that they've got your back. You're a team. Even though there's separation, we are a team,
Yeah,
So that's the goal. But go ahead.
Along those lines, a little bit, like when you have their back, that is, I feel like that's never lying to them, ever. Even if it's not good. If you're like, yeah, this wasn't the best and it could be better, or this was the best it's ever been. And either way, if you always tell the truth 100% of the time, that just goes so far with your team,
I'd say that vice versa too. Like, I think that if you're encouraging your sound guy, like, man, that was killer, and then sometimes we're friends, so I'll be like, yeah, that wasn't so great. I've heard you do better. And because we have a relationship, we can tell each other that. And, usually it's this way more than that way about the bad part, because it's just boom all the time. But to be able to have that relationship to where you could do that, it's so much important. And if you don't have the relationship, you have people coming to you, which we've experienced, where like, oh man, that mix just doesn't sound good. And you're like, I don't know you. Why are you talking to me?
Yeah, that never works. Never
and then
works.
you just turn it up and make them mad.
Yeah.
I don't do that.
Never do that, ever.
But we meet weekly.
Yeah.
We meet with what we do, and we meet with our main musician leaders that lead all the different musicians and our sound head people. And we meet weekly, and we talk about real stuff, And at times we pray with each other, and it's one of the most valuable relationships for a church, is the worship leader and the sound men. But let's just get honest, okay, for a second. Worship leaders, your sound man is everything to you. And so there's got to be honor where honor is due, and the second you start forgetting that, that's a problem.
Then when you take it to just like, there's a few of us guys that are just mixed guys, and our job is to make sure it sounds good. And if we didn't have this structure, we have a structure basically where we have Brian and we have Dan Fairley and any of the senior leadership pastors. And those are the people that basically get to come and tell us what we can and can't do. And having like the open sound booth policy where any church member can walk into the sound booth and just start screaming at you is probably the most unhealthy thing ever for that position, because all it does is just makes the sound guys really angry, or just like bums them out huge and makes them want to quit. It's a really good system. I like it a lot.
A lot of the reason why it works here is because these guys had experience outside the church and on a professional level, working with normal people that maybe aren't, and so they don't get quite as offended because they're used to how things really are. It's important. If you want to keep good people around you got to work extra hard. If you're a leader, and I've learned this the hard way, you got to over-communicate.
Cleaning the stage up when you're not there, getting, all that stuff. What happens when you do that is they'll do it more, and they'll serve you more. It's always the case when you're encouraging those little things, so.
I think one thing, especially like, because a lot of you're dealing with volunteers. How many have volunteers for the most part in your like sound? Yes, see, so most of you have volunteers, and so it's so much more important even then, like when money's not attached, to encourage and like they're serving. We can't ever forget that. They're serving, and so what I always like to do is like take them to coffee or lunch. Like show them your appreciation, but also like give them music to listen to. Get on the same page. Do whatever you need to do that you're on the same page together, so that when they say they think it sounds good and you're up here leading and you can't hear it, you can actually trust that it sounds good.
And when you talk about volunteer, I also think it's a good idea to create processes to help them grow. And I don't mean like, hey, you should go to that class to learn how to mix sound, because that doesn't go off real well. But I mean like, I always wanted to go to conferences to learn stuff, and there's stuff out there, but the church never really, when I was young, it never really valued me, and so I kind of was stuck learning on my own, and that sending them out for that little bit of money or whatever to grow and learn, just it pays off for you in the end, and the other thing I would say about volunteers is, remember, I started off as a volunteer at 16 years old in the youth department. And if it hadn't have been for somebody including me and doing those things that we talk about early on, I wouldn't be where I'm at now. I wouldn't have a career. I wouldn't have anything. And so it's important to know that volunteers are awesome. And there's more than just building, their ability to run sound or ability to do lights or do lyrics or any of those sorts of things. You could be starting something that could carry on their whole lives.
Okay, one thing that I think is important too to establish in your department regarding sound is you always want to get better and you always want to improve, and we never, ever stop growing spiritually and like technically in excellence. We have a thing around here where we never want to plateau. We never want to stop, and sometimes our gift doesn't allow us to grow anymore. Skill. We all have a certain amount of gifting, and whatnot. But even with sound, like we're it's like our relationship with the Lord. We're satisfied 100% in Jesus and what he did for us on the cross. We're satisfied in that relationship, but we're never satisfied, right? We're continuing to grow and learn. And so with the sound, we're never satisfied, right? There's always could be better. It always could be better. And instill that with your sound man so that he doesn't plateau or she doesn't plateau and just get bored. You don't want him to get bored. When we start getting bored, man, it's dangerous.
Yeah, I think along with that goes, especially in your audio department, having the tools to get there. You work that piece of gear until you have gotten better than that gear and it's time to upgrade. But you need to squeeze every ounce of quality that you can out of that piece of equipment.
It's interesting, this whole thing, because being able to communicate to leadership, for the most part, like our leadership, our pastors or whoever's in charge, like a movement of the church, their mind's not, most of the time they're not in this realm, right? They hire you or you're a volunteer worship leader and you're supposed to kind of be that person to handle it all. But being able to communicate to leadership about sound needs and all that kind of stuff can be really difficult. And I just want to encourage you guys, like it took me, 14 years, to kind of like through trial and error to somehow convey what we're doing now, and it was difficult. Like I got offended, for years, and because I knew I was right, and I was right. I was, and then now leadership would say that. And so you almost want to show them like what you could have, in a humble way, and remember that in a humble way, because griping and complaining, getting mad and bitter is not going to get you anywhere, but it just doesn't work. And so figuring out a way to communicate to your leadership and you're putting yourself in their shoes, I think it's important to kind of get in their shoes for a little bit and befriend them and encourage them. Pastors need just as much encouragement as anyone else in the church. Hire people to do the job, or volunteers that do the job, that don't micromanage, that can handle it, that can do it themselves, and work with them and spend a lot more time with them than you think you probably even need to. All right, we're done.
Thanks.
Thank you.